The truth that set me free, how I faced my mother and regained my dignity. I never thought my life could turn upside down in seconds. My name is Lorenzo, I'm 16 years old, and I grew up believing my home was a safe place. But on my birthday, everything changed. My mother, Camila, someone I'd always looked to for approval, humiliated me in front of the entire family. I remember every detail, the flickering candles on the cake, the awkward silence as she stood up and began speaking, the looks of surprise and embarrassment on my cousins' faces. She said cruelly and bluntly that she regretted having me, that she'd always wanted a daughter, and that I would never be enough. In that moment, I felt my chest tighten, a knot in my stomach that felt like it would suffocate me. The birthday song became a distant noise, my thoughts became jumbled, and a deep shame washed over me. I wanted to disappear, to run, to scream, but I was paralyzed. It was as if all the harsh words she'd said to me over the years had exploded all at once. My eyes burned, my breath came in shallow gasps, and I felt a strange heat of anger mixed with fear. In that instant, something inside me shifted. I realized I could no longer live waiting for my mother to value or care about me. Something inside me decided it was time to fight, to protect myself, even if it meant going against the woman who gave me life. For the next few days, I could barely concentrate on anything. School became a strange place. Every hallway reminded me of her disapproving look. Every distant laugh seemed to mock me. My mind kept replaying the words she'd said. I regret having you. Sleep was impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her cold, disdainful expression. I began to feel stomach pains, a constant feeling of nausea, and my head ached from thinking about everything I'd experienced. For years, I'd masked the small abuses, the derogatory comments, the yelling, thinking it was normal, that every mother could be like that at some point. But that night made it clear that nothing was normal. I didn't deserve it. Shame and anger consumed me, but at the same time, there was a paralyzing fear of action. What could I do against her? She'd always held power in my life, in my family, in what people said about me. But a part of me, perhaps the most sensitive or the most tired, began searching for a way out. That's when I thought of my Aunt Andrea, the only close family member my mother hadn't spoken to in almost 10 years. She was always a source of support, someone who listened to me, who protected me when she could, even from a distance. Deciding to move in with my aunt was harder than any other decision I've ever made. At first, I felt guilt, fear, and a sense of betrayal mixed with hope. Andrea welcomed me without judgment, without any questions that would further wound my heart. I remember her hug, tight and warm, and how I felt I had finally found a safe haven. My aunt explained to me that being away from Camilla didn't mean abandoning my mother, but rather caring for myself, my mental health, my right to be respected. Together with my father, Sergio, we began planning a way to protect my rights, to take legal action against the abuse I suffered. I felt anger, yes, but also a new, almost visceral determination. I no longer wanted to feel small, invisible, or useless. Every conversation with my aunt or father strengthened me, as if a light had been turned on within me, but it wasn't easy. Every time I thought about the legal battle in court, I felt my heart race, my mouth dry, and my mind spinning. I knew my mother would try to manipulate everything, make it seem like I was the problem. The idea of facing this storm terrified me, but at the same time, there was a strange sense of freedom. I was finally taking control of my own life. The first few days away from home were the most emotionally difficult. I cried hidden in my aunt's room, feeling a mixture of relief and pain. Relief at being safe, pain at realizing my mother truly despised me. Every call she made, every message that arrived carried an invisible poison, an attempt to make me doubt myself. But I was determined not to fall into her emotional traps anymore. With Andrea's support, I began recording everything, writing down every detail of the abuse, every insult, every manipulation. It seemed obsessive, but it was my way of proving that I wasn't imagining anything, that my pain was real. Little by little, I began to feel less alone. My father, who was always there despite the distance, showed me that he would never abandon me, that he was willing to fight for me until the end. I began to understand that my life didn't need to be defined by my mother's contempt, that I had the right to a different future, filled with respect and true love. Each day was a step. Each small victory filled me with courage, but also made clear the size of the battle that lay ahead. There were times when I considered giving up. I felt like the world was against me, that everyone around me could be manipulated by my mother, and that I might never be heard. I felt alone, tired, and the anger boiled so intensely it made me tremble. But one memory kept recurring. Andrea's embrace, my father's firm voice telling me that I deserved respect, that my life didn't need to be shaped by someone else's hatred. This memory was an anchor that kept me going. I decided I had to keep going, even when everything seemed difficult, even when the pain seemed unbearable. Every step, no matter how small, represented a chance to regain my dignity and security. It was at that moment that I realized something important. My strength came from no one but myself, but I didn't have to face it all alone. The journey was just beginning, and I was ready to fight, to rebuild myself, and finally find peace amidst the chaos. The legal process began slowly, but from the very first day, I felt the tension rising as if my body were about to explode. Standing before lawyers, judges, and all the bureaucracy was terrifying. I had never felt so vulnerable. Yet at the same time, I felt a strange sense of control. For the first time in my life, my words and my evidence mattered. No longer my mother's whims or lies. Each document, each testimony from my aunt and father felt like a small victory against the years of abuse I had endured. Still, anger boiled inside, a mixture of disbelief and pain. It was hard to believe that the woman who gave me life could be so cruel. Many nights I lay awake, imagining what she might invent, how she would try to manipulate me in front of the court and the community. My stomach churned and my hands trembled as I imagined the encounters, but I also felt alive, determined not to back down. I knew I needed to keep every thought clear, every piece of evidence organized, because this was my chance to rebuild my life. And somehow, even though I was scared, I began to realize that nothing was greater than the desire to finally live without feeling constant fear of my own mother. As the process progressed, the emotional pressure hit me in unexpected ways. I remembered moments from my childhood when she called me worthless or made me feel wrong simply for existing. Sometimes I cried alone in my room, clutching my pillow as if it could absorb my pain. But at the same time, I began to realize how those memories served to strengthen me. Each memory of humiliation was now proof of my resilience. I began writing about everything I felt, documenting my emotions and experiences as if I were building a map of my own survival. Andrea helped me, always patiently, encouraging me to express everything without fear of judgment. My father was always there, explaining each step of the process and reinforcing that I didn't need to feel guilt or shame for fighting for what was right. Over time, I realized that my pain didn't need to be a burden, but rather a tool for growing and learning to protect myself. I learned to listen to myself, to validate my emotions, and to understand that my feelings were legitimate. Little by little, I began to feel a thread of hope forming in my chest, something that told me that I could come out of that situation stronger, more aware, and capable of loving myself, even though my mother had never been able to make me feel that way. The battle wasn't just legal, but social as well. My mother tried to influence family and friends, spreading distorted versions of events, trying to paint me as ungrateful or exaggerated. Every time I heard some comment or manipulation, my stomach would twist, and I felt like crying and screaming at the same time. But little by little, I learned not to react impulsively. Andrea taught me to respond with facts, not blind emotion, and my father reinforced that the truth always comes out. Every family gathering became a test of endurance. I felt my body tense, my breathing rapid, my muscles stiff, but I held myself together, took deep breaths, and remembered that I was fighting for my future, not for recognition from someone who never valued me. I discovered that my words carried weight and that my evidence was my voice when my mother tried to silence me. Slowly, I realized that my anger could be channeled into action, into protection, into rebuilding, and not just into pain. I began to feel more confident, more able to face whatever came, even though each step still brought anxiety and painful memories. There were times when I doubted myself. I wondered if I was overreacting, if my emotions were valid, if I truly deserved to fight. But with each doubt, a clear memory emerged of what I'd been through. The insults, the humiliations, the moments I felt invisible and despised. This reminded me that my fight wasn't just for myself, but for my dignity, my safety, and my right to a worthwhile childhood. I needed to prove to myself that I wasn't weak, that I deserved to be heard, and that I could assert myself even in the face of my mother's manipulation. At the same time, I discovered that I didn't have to feel angry all the time. Little by little, I was able to separate my pain from my strategy. I learned that feeling sadness, fear, or frustration didn't make me weak, but human. Each day was an exercise in resilience and self-awareness. And little by little, I realized that rebuilding wasn't just about winning the process, but about rediscovering myself as a person, rediscovering my voice, my worth, and my ability to live without fear. One of the most defining moments of this period was when I received the news that the court would begin hearing our testimonies and analyzing the evidence. My heart raced, my breath became shallow, and I felt a chill run down my spine. But instead of paralyzing me, that chill reminded me of how far I had come. I remembered every tear, every sleepless night, every time I almost gave up, every conversation with my aunt and father that strengthened me. I realized that everything I felt was legitimate and that my struggle was not in vain. For the first time, I felt a strange combination of nervousness and real hope, something I hadn't felt in years. Each step forward was a silent victory. Each act of courage reminded me that I could exist without fear of rejection or contempt. It was at that moment that I realized that the greatest battle had already been won within me. My strength, my determination, and my ability to believe in myself had overcome the pain my mother had tried to inflict on me throughout my life. The day we went to court was surreal. My heart pounded so hard it felt like it was going to leap out of my chest. My hands trembled, my stomach churned, and for a few seconds I considered giving up, running away. But Andrea grabbed my shoulder, looked me in the eyes, and said firmly, "You are stronger than you think. Breathe and let the truth speak for you." My father was there too, giving me silent strength. As I began to speak, recounting the abuse, humiliation, and contempt I'd experienced, I felt something inside me loosen. Each word was like a cut string, releasing the pressure that had been building for years. The judge watched me intently, taking note of every detail, and for some reason, I felt like I was finally being heard. For the first time, I didn't need to apologize for existing or justify my emotions. Every piece of evidence, every message, every testimony from Andrea and my father fit together like pieces of a puzzle that finally revealed the truth. The feeling was strange. Fear and relief mingled, but also a quiet confidence that I could endure, that my pain was not in vain. I left the courtroom with my body exhausted, but my mind lighter than I'd imagined possible. The family and social repercussions were intense. Some people believed my mother's lies. Others finally heard my side and began to support me. This brought a mix of emotions: anger, at those who didn't believe me, gratitude for those who stood by me, and a growing sense of responsibility for my own narrative. I began to realize that my life didn't need to be shaped by those who didn't respect me. Every conversation with friends, family, or even strangers who listened to my story was an opportunity to reaffirm my strength and my dignity. At the same time, I felt the weight of judgment, the anxiety of being misunderstood, and the constant reminder of what my mother said about me. But little by little, I learned to filter what strengthened me and what weakened me. I began to record my thoughts, my victories, and my emotions. This practice helped me understand that rebuilding didn't happen instantly. Every step mattered, every detail mattered, and every conscious choice I made brought me closer to the life I deserved. A life where I could feel safe, respected, and able to grow without fear. As the process progressed, I experienced unexpected internal changes. I learned to acknowledge my emotions without fear or guilt. Anger stopped being merely destructive and became fuel for action to protect my rights and well-being. I began to pay more attention to my mental health, talking to Andrea about my fears and anxieties, and finding strategies to deal with the anxiety that still arose. I discovered that my strength came not from the absence of pain, but from the ability to continue, to face what had previously paralyzed me. Each step taken, each small victory, was a reaffirmation that I could exist without needing my mother's approval. I began to dream of a different life, a life where my identity was not determined by the contempt of others, but by my own ability to love and respect myself. There were moments of intense conflict, of course. Some hearings were exhausting, with my mother trying to manipulate, cry, or blame me. Each meeting left me exhausted, physically and emotionally. I left trembling, with cold hands, a dry mouth, and a mind full of confusing thoughts. But something inside me remained firm. I knew I couldn't give in. The feeling of injustice was overwhelming, but the certainty that I deserved respect, love, and dignity gave me strength. I realized that my mother would never change, and that my happiness couldn't depend on her. It was a painful but liberating learning experience. My life needed to be built by me, not by the whims of those who didn't know how to love me. The court's final decision was a mixture of relief and strangeness. Sergio was granted full custody, and Camilla was ordered to pay retroactive child support. I remember the heavy silence when the judge announced it, and how my body seemed to float, light and tense at the same time. For the first time in years, I felt justice not through revenge, but through recognition of my dignity. I left with a sense of freedom I never imagined I would feel. Life still held pain, memories, and wounds, but I knew I could walk without constant fear. I learned that true strength lies in acknowledging your own pain, acting courageously, and surrounding yourself with people who truly care. For the first time, I realized that being heard, respected, and valued was possible, and that even when those who should love us reject us, we can find love, protection, and rebuilding elsewhere. Over the next few months, rebuilding my life was harder than I imagined. Every routine I'd had before was marked by painful memories, and small triggers made me relive old humiliations. Waking up in the morning, looking in the mirror, and seeing myself alone still felt strange. My skin crawled with memories, and anxiety pounded in my chest. But I started creating new habits, studying at set times, playing sports, and talking daily with Andrea. Each step was a conscious effort to reconnect with who I really was, not the devalued version my mother insisted on constructing. I discovered that emotional recovery isn't linear. Some days were filled with confidence. Others felt like weeks of regression. But little by little, I allowed myself to feel proud of my small achievements, my strength in facing the process, and the courage to stand up for myself. My relationship with my father and Andrea strengthened in ways I never imagined possible. With them, I could talk about any fear, any doubt, any anger, without feeling judged. Andrea became an almost maternal figure, offering constant support, realistic advice, and genuine affection. My father, who had always been there, began to listen to me even more. And together, we learned to develop strategies to deal with the emotional impact my mother still tried to inflict. This support network taught me something fundamental. We don't have to face our battles alone. I discovered that trusting and allowing others to help me is not weakness, but an act of courage, and that building a secure life requires connection, not isolation. At the same time, I began to notice changes in my self-esteem. Small actions like being able to concentrate on my studies, participate in activities I previously avoided, and express my opinions without fear gave me a sense of power I had never experienced before. It was as if each step, each achievement, was a silent reparation for the pain I had carried for years. There were still days when I felt anger or sadness, but I began to realize that these feelings didn't have to paralyze me. I learned to accept them, reflect on them, and transform them into strength. My mind began to open to possibilities that previously seemed impossible, living without fear, trusting myself, and believing that my story could have different chapters filled with conscious choices and self-respect. Friendships also changed. I learned to value people who treated me with respect and honesty, and to distance myself from those who tried to manipulate or belittle my experiences. I discovered that healthy relationships aren't built on pleasing others, but rather on reciprocity and trust. Each friendship I strengthen now serves as a reminder that I'm not alone and that I can create secure bonds, even when those who should love me have abandoned me emotionally. A sense of belonging, however small, began to fill spaces of loneliness I hadn't even known existed. And little by little, I realized that my happiness didn't need to depend on the approval of my mother or anyone unwilling to respect my truth. Looking back, I realized that the months of struggle, pain, and fear were also months of intense growth. I learned to put myself first without guilt, to recognize my feelings as valid, and to understand that my life doesn't need to be defined by those who despised me. There are still painful memories, and some emotional scars remain, but they no longer dictate my worth or my choices. I discovered that overcoming pain isn't about erasing the pain, but learning to walk with it, transforming it into strength, and creating a life based on respect, self-love, and awareness. For the first time in a long time, I feel I can look to the future with some hope, knowing that even amidst adversity, I am capable of existing, growing, and living fully, even if part of the wound is still there. Over time, I realized that my life didn't need to revolve around my mother's approval. Each day I woke up, took a deep breath, and followed through with my plans. I felt myself regaining a little more of my emotional freedom. Small victories, like being able to talk to friends without fear of judgment or participate in activities without anxiety, became symbols of my progress. I learned that rebuilding is made of small steps and that each one matters. The feeling of being able to choose my own life without depending on those who always made me feel inadequate began to fill me with a silent but constant strength I never imagined I possessed. My relationship with my mother changed drastically, but not in the way I expected. She continued to insist that she was the victim, that she suffered through the process, that everyone was against her. But it didn't affect me in the same way. Now, I could listen without every word breaking my heart. I learned to set clear boundaries, protect myself emotionally, and recognize that I can't change someone who doesn't want to see themselves. This was liberating. As strange as it may seem, letting go of trying to be accepted by her gave me immense relief and allowed me to focus my energy on what really mattered, my own life and happiness. Andrea and my father's support was essential, but the greatest learning came from within. I discovered that my emotions are legitimate, that my worth doesn't depend on those who rejected me, and that I can fully exist even amid the pain of the past. I learned to forgive myself for the years I doubted my strength and worth. Every conscious decision I made, every limit I set, every moment I chose to move forward despite fear, taught me something fundamental. Overcoming is not about erasing pain, but transforming it into learning and strength to build a better life. Today, I can look to the future with more hope. There are still moments when I feel sadness or anger, memories of abuse and humiliation that will take time to fully heal, but I know I can handle it. I've learned to trust myself, to put myself first without guilt, and to build relationships based on respect and trust. Every step I take is a reaffirmation that pain doesn't define me, and that my story can be written with conscious choices, courage, and self-love. If I could give one piece of advice to someone who's been through something similar, it would be, believe in yourself, seek support, and don't be afraid to walk away from those who hurt you. Overcoming is possible, even when it seems impossible. It's not about forgetting the pain, but about learning to live with it, transforming suffering into strength, and building a life where you're valued and respected. Today, I'm 16 years old, and I can say that despite the scars and the pain, I'm finally finding peace and security. Life goes on, and so do I, stronger than I ever imagined.